Welcome back, guys. I'm your trainer, Tommy Rivs. We are here in the beautiful historic city of Dubrovnik. We are on the Dalmatian coast in the country of Croatia, here in the Balkans. This is our culture walk of the city of Dubrovnik. We're going to work our way around this outer wall. We're going to come around and explore the inside of the city, guys. This is one of the most famous cities, most popular destinations in the world right now. Let's go and explore. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that is. So here we go, just a gentle walk. We are now, just to give you some context, we are up on the city wall that works its way around the city. This was built around 600 years ago, a process that took a couple of centuries in and of itself.
Thank you. Excuse me.
Guys, there are people from all over the world here coming to see these incredible sights, and part of the reason is because of the history of this location. So what we're approaching right now, this is coming up quick. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. This tower that we're going to see is a tower which was built near the end of the actual wall that we're approaching, or that we're walking upon. Excuse us. So this tower right here, built at the end, was built at a time when the actual number of blocks, the stones in the area, were very scarce. So because of that, what we find is, let's just get around here. I'll give you guys a better view real quick, and then I'll give that explanation. So this was built at a time after most of the wall had been constructed. There was an incredible scarcity of stones. And so in order to build this tower, what was required is people that wanted to enter the city of Dubrovnik, they had to pay essentially a toll fee. So to be able to enter the tower, they had to bring a stone which equaled their weight. They brought that stone, and those stones were actually used to construct this tower. You can see, guys, all these stones are limestone. Limestone is an incredibly abundant stone here in this part of the world. But because of the mammoth size of this wall, as well as another wall located within a small fortress city known as Stone, just a little bit outside of this area, there was a scarcity of those stones. So, all right, let's work our way around. We've completely circumnavigated that tower. Because of that construction effort, as well as the efforts that were undertaken to actually build this wall, this area served as an incredibly safe stronghold for the people here in what's known as the Republic of Dubrovnik. It was actually, at that time, it was known as the Republic of Ragusa. That was an independent republic that was established here in the area. So guys, if we remember the history of the Balkans, specifically these countries in the former Yugoslavia, there has been an incredible amount of division. This is an area which is highly contested because of the resources, because of the divisions within culture, within language, within belief systems. And so there have been lots of different ruling empires that have taken over this specific piece of the world. So as these empires would come in, there would be competition, there would be a new ruler, a new language, a new belief system. But this specific area, the Republic of Dubrovnik, the Republic of Ragusa as it was known in that time, what took place here was a really successful effort to be able to establish an autonomous republic. So what I mean by that is the people that lived here, they valued their freedom. They valued the liberty that they had, so much so that they used the money that they could collect from the different resources in the area to actually pay off the emperors so that they could have their freedom. So although they were governed by different empires that came in and spread their influence in the region, they were actually able to maintain their specific autonomy. So because of that, we see a powerful culture, a distinct language, a distinct group of people that inhabited this area and were able to maintain that autonomy throughout much of history. Excuse us, guys. Thank you. Guys, so this is a period, or this is an area that was established right around the year 600, so over 1400 years ago. This was right after the Roman Empire expanded throughout most of this territory. There are excavations that are taking place. There have been incredible destructive events that have taken place in this area, and because of those destructive events, what's taken place is rebuilding. And anytime this area is rebuilt, there is archaeological findings that take place. So the story of Dubrovnik, prehistory, that's still essentially being written. Every time they go in to renovate, they find a little bit more about this area. So it's believed that there was a Roman settlement initially in this area. After that Roman settlement, a group of Slavic individuals, so Slavs are the people that live specifically in this region, they came in and they began to establish a community here. That Slavic community, they were fortunate because of their location. There was a high amount of a very specific resource that was incredibly valuable at that time. That resource, guys, is actually just common salt. So salt at that period of time was valued equal to gold. So a kilo of salt actually had the same value as a kilo of gold. Just outside of Dubrovnik, there's another region known as Stone, spelled S-T-O-N. It was a community where these salt pools were laid out. The water would come in from the ocean, and then the water would evaporate, and that water would become saltier and saltier and saltier as it evaporated, and then that salt was harvested. It wasn't mined, it was actually harvested through that process. So guys, as that took place, as salt became a resource, that incredibly valuable resource, the people here in the Republic of Ragusa, or the Republic of Dubrovnik, hello, the people within that republic, that's those Slavic people, they were able to use that resource to essentially buy their autonomy and buy their liberty. That is something that became an incredibly important component within that society, that Republic of Ragusa, Republic of Dubrovnik. So much so, guys, that in the 1600s, I know that seems somewhat recent compared to all the history that we experience in this area, but in the 1600s they abolished slavery. It became illegal to practice slavery, so much so that if you broke that law, you were actually put down in the dungeon here in this fortress city of Dubrovnik. Guys, what we see off in the distance, that is the Adriatic. So we're in the south of Croatia, the Adriatic Sea coming up against these limestone cliffs, and then the village, which became a town, which became a mighty city of Dubrovnik, was built upon those walls. You can see, guys, this incredibly strong fortress. The reason they built this fortress is because of those resources that they had, the ability to build ships in this area, as well as the salt that came from Stone. They used that salt and heavily guarded that salt so that they could have the money that they needed to pay off whatever empire was invading at the time. That's how, guys, they were able to maintain the autonomy as well as that liberty that they so highly valued. Guys, let's fast forward just real quick. Let's just slow down and take in a view as we look off through this building right here. These are ruins. These are ruins of buildings that were destroyed in the 1990s. So we're fast forwarding almost 1,400 years in history from the time these walls were built to the destruction of this building. If you look up off in the distance, what you see is a hill. On the top of that hill, it's difficult to make out, so I'll describe it to you. On the top of that hill, we have a radio tower as well as a white cross. That radio tower and that white cross were the first two things to be destroyed when the People's Army of Yugoslavia, backed by the Serbs, as well as backed by Montenegro. Those two countries, Serbia and Montenegro, backed further by Slobodan Milosevic. They came in here during that war that was taking place in the 1990s here in Croatia. They came in here and they began to attack the city. So that area, the mountain there, the first two things that they took out was that symbol of Christianity, specifically the Roman Catholic traditions that were held in this area, and that radio tower to block out communication. So after that took place, a heavy onslaught took place where the troops would fire down shells as well as machine gun fire into Dubrovnik from the mountains. As that took place, there were a huge amount of casualties. Several hundred people died, and then multiple times that number were actually wounded. So what took place, guys, is what was known as the defenders of Dubrovnik. These young men would climb up the mountains during the night with nothing but hunting rifles, and they would have an attack against those individuals, those soldiers in that Yugoslav People's Army. So they did what they could with what they had to defend that territory, but because of the way that they weren't backed by heavy artillery, the way the Serbians were, there was a huge amount of casualties that took place. Hello. Hello. All right, guys, let's look out off to the right. More views of the Adriatic, and then we're going to come down and eventually work our way into the fortress above the harbor and then down into the actual city. All right, here we go, guys. So people from all over the world have come to see this city. It's been specifically popular just recently because this has been the location where the capital of Westeros, that city of King's Landing in the series Game of Thrones, was filmed. So that tower that we saw initially, the one that was used as a fortress, but what was built as people would come in and they had to pay their entrance into the city by bringing a stone their same weight. That tower, guys, the actual history behind that tower we now know, but that tower in the series of Game of Thrones, it served as what's known as the House of the Undying. So the reason that they were built like this is because people could come in from sea, but the vantage point up here on top of the mountains or on top of these hills and on top of these walls allowed them to use the cannons that were placed in these holes on the fortresses to attack any threat from sea, and then the walls that were built on the opposite side up towards the hills, as well as the additional wall that was built in the town of stone, served as the first and the second fortresses or barriers to any threat that potentially came into the area. Part of the reason that manpower was so impressive is that during an era when there was so much slavery taking place to build incredible structures like this, this is an area where the manpower was derived from the actual people that were living here. Hi guys. Excuse us, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, man. So guys, it was in 1600 that they abolished slavery. As I said, that might seem like a very recent time considering the way that that's viewed now, but remember guys, it wasn't until the 1800s that slavery was abolished within the United States as well as the United Kingdom. So they were literally 2 centuries ahead of those other huge empires. That liberty is something that was valued above everything else. You'll actually see slogans which use the Latin name Libertas, so the liberty. That's something that's still valued. You can see it inscripted on the walls. So guys, as different empires came in, there was influences that took place. So there was, as the Roman Empire came in, that Roman Empire lasted for a really long period of time. Constantine, he converted to Christianity. You guys remember that took place right around the year 300 AD. That was a huge transition from the previous emperor, Diocletian. Remember, guys, we were able to explore that palace, Diocletian's palace, that transition that took place where the pagan gods of the previous Roman Empire shifted, and then Christianity became the most important religious of that empire. So those influences were felt here in the area. The people here developed that Roman Christianity. This became a really important factor, and the reason, guys, is because when the Ottoman Empire came into this area in the 1400s, they brought with them powerful armies, powerful influence, but they also brought with them that Islamic faith. Remember, guys, that Ottoman Empire came from what was known at the time as Anatolia. We know now, or we call this area now, Turkey. So the Turks came in with that empire, but also with the change in religion. It was incredibly important to the people that lived here in that Republic of Dubrovnik to be able to maintain their belief system that they'd inherited from that Roman Empire and all the time that they were here. So in order to maintain that belief system, they paid a heavy price. They paid a huge tax to the Ottomans. The Sultan Suleiman the Great, as he was known, he required a huge amount of money to be paid so that they could have that autonomy. Remember, guys, the Turks were only 5 miles away. We're not very far from that border of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The people who make up that country were from those same Slavic tribes ethnically. So the only difference between Bosnia and Herzegovina and them adopting the traditions of the Turks and that Ottoman Empire and the people here within Croatia and Dubrovnik, the only difference, guys, was in the ability of the people here in that republic to pay off the Ottoman Empire to be able to have that independence. Guys, we're now coming off of that city wall. We're going to work down into the actual city of Dubrovnik. Guys, this is going to come at us quick. I'm going to try my very best to let you guys see as much as possible and communicate to you what I'm seeing. But here we go. More than anything, let's just go in and explore these incredibly tight, incredibly strong walls, these little corridors. Here we go. So guys, another really important thing took place in the 1600s. It was in 1660. There was an earthquake that leveled much of this area. The walls remain standing. They've since been repaired, but a lot of the architecture, the buildings that were built here, a lot of those buildings, those important buildings, were destroyed, and then they were rebuilt in the 1700s and the 1800s. So there's a change in the architecture which represents a change in the styles, those building styles, specifically the art that's used not only on the buildings which the people lived in, but also on the religious buildings. So we're going to come out here, guys, and the first thing that we're going to see, we're going to hit it quick, is a cathedral which was built in the 1700s. It was right after those buildings which were built below the foundations remained intact, but the other buildings were destroyed. So what we see, guys, is a change in the Gothic architecture that was used in the buildings which were built here before, and we see the change in the Baroque architecture. So you can see, guys, up there above on the pillars, remember, the Baroque architecture was the elaborate, ornate representations of art. We see it up at the tops of the columns, we see it in the statues. This was an important time, guys. In the 1700s, in the 1800s, this was a time where there'd been a distinction between the Roman Catholics as well as the Protestants. Right around the 1500s, these Protestant movements began to emerge. The Protestant movements, what they used was very simple styles, and so the Catholic Church, they pushed this Baroque architecture to distinguish themselves from the Protestants. Guys, as we come over here into the corner, I want you to look up. What we see right here is the peppering of bullet holes from heavy machine gun fire that took place during the 1990s when this area was shelled by the Serbian forces as well as the forces from Montenegro, part of that People's Army of Yugoslavia. Guys, a really interesting thing that took place. It wasn't until Dubrovnik was hit that people internationally started to pay attention to the destruction that was taking place in this area. Dubrovnik was hit relatively late in that conflict in the 90s. Croatia had been under fire from that Yugoslav People's Army. The Serbian forces backed by Slobodan Milosevic. It wasn't until that took place that people started to recognize this. It's interesting too that it wasn't until Mostar was completely destroyed that people started to recognize. And part of the reason that the greater international world started to pay attention was because these incredible historical and cultural icons, these artistic buildings, they started to become destroyed. So it's really interesting. It's a little bit incriminating for us as human beings to look back and think about that sometimes we value history, we value art, we value the humanities more than we actually value humanity. So it's just something that, just to think about. Just something that's really ironic and sad that it wasn't until the building started to be destroyed that the international world got involved and decided to do what they could to put an end to the conflict. Guys, here's another artistic representation, that same style, built in the 1700s and the 1800s. You can see the way that the small angels there, and then up the representations of the saints and the Pope up at the top, the ornate way that the columns are decorated with that Baroque style. Guys, let's flip around here, and what I want to show you is the contrast in those buildings, the way those Roman arches come across, and then this building right here. What we see, this is a building that actually wasn't destroyed during that earthquake, and we see just the difference in the arches, the difference between the Roman arches and the Gothic arches. The Gothic arches coming up into a point, whereas the other cathedrals that we saw actually come up and it's a rounded entrance to those buildings. Guys, we're gonna come up and we're gonna see just a little bit more here in Dubrovnik. Just a couple more structures that I want to show you guys. All right, here we go, guys. So let's work our way down into some of these streets. Guys, another point that I wanted to bring up, a really interesting, just really interesting thing that we see from this conflict. When we were in Mostar, when we saw the bridge that came across, that bridge was destroyed. That important historical icon, that artistic representation of history, this building, or this bridge rather, was destroyed by the Croat forces, the same Croat forces that lived here in Croatia. That bridge was destroyed by explosives being attached to the bridge and blowing up the bridge. So this is something that when we're there in that area, it's really easy to see that and we can condemn those forces. But guys, now we're here in Dubrovnik where those forces lived, and we see the destruction that took place to the people as well as the structures here. And it just changes a little bit. It changes the perspective a little bit. We see how when you're in an area, you're with the people, you see the humanity of the people, you see the way they live, you see the way that style of life is threatened. It's really easy to step in and take an alliance specifically with those people. You travel 30 kilometers, you're in a completely different area with a different belief system, a different group of people, and you can see the destruction with those people. You see the humanity of those people. It's really easy to take that side. What we can see, guys, from the change that took place, just this small little shift geographically, seeing both sides of that conflict, what we can take away from that is how complicated it is and how difficult it is to see the good guys from the bad guys. You can see the fog of war, you can see the conflict from both different angles. You can see how it's really, really difficult. These people who were once unified under that same Yugoslavian country, families that were divided, friends that worked alongside each other during that Yugoslavian country's movement, how all of that was separated and you had these people fighting against each other in these really, really close geographical quarters. Guys, what we're gonna do is we're gonna work our way up this staircase. If you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you may recognize the setting here. This is actually where Cersei carried out that Walk of Atonement. If that's a reference that you recognize, it might be fun to go and check that out. If not, what we're gonna see is the staircase that leads up to what was once the college of that Ragusan Empire. We can see that guy's literally written out here, several hundred years old, that inscription. And then guys, let's come up here and take in the views of yet another Catholic church built in the 1700s after the destruction that took place because of that terrible, terrible earthquake that took place. We'll come down here and we'll wrap this up. All right, so guys, if we look up off into the distance, we can see the hill where those forces of the Yugoslav People's Army were centered. This is the route that those defenders of Dubrovnik would take. We can see more of the actual city itself. Guys, this has been absolutely incredible to share this experience with you guys here in Dubrovnik. I hope you guys have been able to see why this is such an incredible location, all the history, that layers of culture, the different people. I'm your trainer, Tommy Rose, guys. We are here in Dubrovnik, beautiful country of Croatia. Hope to see you guys soon.